But as we dive into our last week here in Ecclesiastes, I want to start with a little bit of a story, a historical story of sorts that you might be familiar with. So the night before the launch, Morton Theocal, engineer, Roger Boris Jolly stared at the temperature readings. It was unusually cold, far colder than the O-rings and the shuttle's boosters were tested for. He knew what could happen. He knew that in freezing weather, the seals could fail and the shuttle could explode. He called a teleconference with NASA engineers, his voice steady but urgent. Delaying the launch is the safest option, he said. The O-rings may not seal properly in this cold. We could lose the shuttle. There was a pause. Then polite, careful words from the other side. We understand, Roger, but the launch is scheduled. There's pressure from the public in the program. Can we meet about this in the morning? Roger felt a familiar knot. He knew that this schedule pressure wasn't abstract. It was real human lives that might be gambled for convenience. In the morning, Theocal management hesitated. Their voices wavered. One manager whispered, worried about budget overruns and political fallout. Others feared looking incompetent if they delayed. The engineers' warnings were muted by fear of disagreeing with superiors. Roger watched as the words "launch, proceed" were typed, and his stomach sank. At 11:38 a.m., the Challenger rose gracefully into the sky. The crowd cheered, and cameras rolled, and children waved. Then, 73 seconds later, a flame licked the side of the shuttle. The O-ring had failed. The fuel tank ruptured, and the Challenger disintegrated into a burst of smoke and fire. 7 lives were gone instantly, and Roger now felt a hollow weight in his chest. Not because he hadn't tried, he had. He felt this weight because fear had stopped the system from acting. And that is obviously detailing the events that took place in the late 80s with the Challenger. And that actually connected pretty well with my community as well. Kristen McAuliffe, one of the teachers in space that were on that shuttle. There were schools in the area named after her. And a disaster that unfortunately followed up again later in 2002 that I remember vividly growing up there in the state. But as they look back at really the multiple events that led to that disaster, they concluded that there was a fear built within the system, right? That the system that was supposed to slow things down, to change the course of events, stopped. It didn't work well. There was a fear of embarrassment. There was a fear of delay. There was even a fear of being wrong. And what happened is in that moment when things should have stopped and pivoted and changed, the fear crippled them from making that hard call. And that fear ultimately caused some painful consequences. Now, I describe that situation to you because maybe that's the situation you find yourself in this morning. There is a certain fear kind of welling within your chest, something that cripples you. Maybe you think about the future and you're fearful. And what I want us to kind of wrestle with this morning is the tension that fear about the future can cripple us in the present and ultimately hurt us in the future. I mean, think back on that example with the Challenger, right? There was fear about delaying the launch of the shuttle. There was fear about maybe being wrong about those O-rings. And so no one moved. They just proceeded with things as planned, and it ultimately cost the lives of multiple individuals and really delayed the shuttle program for years to come. Again, maybe you're fearful about the future this morning. Maybe there's something weighing on you. Maybe there's something that you struggle with, maybe an addiction on substances. Maybe you struggle with alcohol, prescription drugs, illicit drugs. Maybe you struggle with an addiction relating to behavioral items, such as gambling, pornography. Maybe you spend way too much. Maybe you're even addicted to work. And you know it's not right, yet you're afraid to get help because you're embarrassed to talk about it. Or maybe you're worried about the legal or relational ramifications of talking about these addictions that you struggle with. Maybe you're here today and you're in a struggling marriage. And you're afraid to get help because, again, you're embarrassed to talk about it. You don't want to address the issue, and you think if you just ignore it, it'll get better. Maybe you're struggling with your faith, and you've come to church Sunday after Sunday, but you're not really sure if you're convinced of anything we talk about here today. And you're afraid of maybe people judging you as you talk about the reality that you have not committed your life to following Christ. You're struggling with your faith, and again, you're afraid to get help because you're embarrassed to talk about it. You don't want to address the issue, and you think that by ignoring it, it'll just go away. You see, this is the equivalent of getting in your car this afternoon and you hear a loud knock, and rather than pause and address the issue with your engine, you just turn up the radio and keep driving. And again, we could do that with our cars, but with our lives, it has so many more serious implications. And what I want you to realize is that whatever issue is weighing on you, the longer you wait to address the issue, the more issues it will cause. Right? That knock in your car, you can possibly prevent it from causing more serious issues if you address it sooner rather than later. Your car might go into a big ball of flames like that. But again, all those things I pointed out this morning, the more serious things that we struggle with, right? Addiction, relational issues, even our faith. We have fear about addressing them because we don't know about the future and what it means to address them. But the reality I want you to see is the longer we wait to get serious about these things in our life, the more painful the consequences of them will be. Right? The longer we wait to address the issue, the more issues it will cause. And so when we fear what comes next, what do we do in the moment, right? What is the next right step for us? And so this is kind of where Ecclesiastes takes us this morning as we wrap up our study in Ecclesiastes. We're going to be looking at the entirety of chapter 11 and 12, and before you panic, they're not super long. They flow pretty quick. But we're going to be finishing up our time in Ecclesiastes, where we have spent now 13 weeks talking about making life work, right? Life under the sun. How do we make our life matter? What is it like to live on this earth with all the problems and beauty of it? Because Solomon writes about his experience under the sun, what he's observed and what he's seen, and he's making some good godly bits of wisdom for us to read and apply to our lives, to consider how we live our lives. And so several weeks ago, we introduced kind of a new theme in the book. There's kind of two distinct pieces, and the second piece of Ecclesiastes deals with this theme of uncertainty, where Solomon speaks into the human condition of the fear of the unknown, the fear of what's next. And so this fear is typically an emotion that accompanies uncertainty, right? We want to know what's next, and when we don't know what's next, we get scared and we freeze up. And what I want you to see is sometimes when we freeze up, it causes more problems than we fully process in the moment. How many of y'all have ever done a rope swing before? You guys ever done rope swings? All right, so if you've ever done a rope swing, what are two of the most important things for you to remember? All right, first one, hang on, and then also let go, right? Two very important things to remember, right? Hang on and let go, but let go at the right time, right? It's all about the timing of letting go, right? You know, as you've done a rope swing before, as you swing out, if you don't let go at the right time, you will swing back into whatever you swang from. That's the right word. And if you fail to do that, you're going to get hurt. But here's the thing, as you think through the logistics of swinging out into that body of water and dropping down, you need to act with a bit of wisdom, right? You need to do the best you can to time your release. You need to do the best you can to land well. And the same thing is true about our lives today, right? Our future might be uncertain, yes, but we need wisdom in the present. And so one bit of wisdom that Solomon gives us in the midst of uncertainty is that we can't be afraid to let go. We can't be afraid to move. Check out how he communicates this in our text. Look at verse 1 of Ecclesiastes chapter 11. He says this, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days." Maybe you look at that metaphor and you scratch your head and you're like, what in the world is Solomon saying? Well, you would be in good company with a lot of other theologians. We don't know, right? There is no definitive explanation for what he says there. There's a lot of good ideas, But as you look at that, you kind of see a principle that most theologians kind of align with, that it deals with maybe some type of maritime trade, right? Where a product, right, is loaded up almost into a ship and sent out, sold, and some type of return comes back, right? We see this picture of someone that is taking a risk. And so he has that verse in verse 1, and he follows it up with verse 2. He says, give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. So we have a picture of taking a risk, right? Sending things out, hoping for a return. And then in verse 2, he follows up with a picture of diversification. Because, as he says, we don't know what disaster may happen on earth. We don't know the future. This is the same reason why every spring most of you all plant more than one crop. Right? This is the same reason that as you plan for retirement, you don't put all your money in one set of stocks. Right? You don't metaphorically put all of your eggs in one basket. So Solomon is addressing this issue of uncertainty, and he's giving us some real good life advice here. He's saying with these two verses, and they complement each other, don't be afraid to take risk, yet be wise in how you take the risk. Right? It's like on that rope swing. Don't be afraid to get on that rope and swing out, but be wise on how you do it. Right? Be wise in letting go at the right time. Be wise on the integrity of that rope or the branch swinging out on. Don't be afraid to take risks, yet be wise in how you take risks, right? This is good advice as we deal with uncertainty in our future. We don't know the future. Yet what Solomon encourages us here is not to wait around and do nothing. We are called to take calculated risk. He continues in verse 3. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. Well, that seems really deep, Solomon. What are you getting at? He's saying, right, we don't know the outcome of certain events. Right? The clouds are full of rain, and they empty themselves on the earth. We don't know when it will rain or whether it will rain at all. And even if we do, we can't control it or change it. And this is sometimes what makes us freeze up in the moment, the uncertainty of the situation. We want to know what comes next. We want to know how things will turn out before we put ourselves out there. And Solomon here just, again, addresses a reality of life that we don't know what comes next. Just like that story I shared with you about the Challenger, right? The individuals who could have stopped that thing were afraid to step out and slow down that takeoff because they didn't know what would come next. The legal ramifications, the political fallout. And because they slowed down, or they did not slow down, they had a mess on their hands. Verse 4. This is so applicable to this community for sure. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. Essentially, Solomon's saying is if you sit around and wait for the most ideal time to plant, you never will. Right? Is that not the story of this community, right? If you wait until it is the most ideal conditions to put seed in the ground, you never will plant anything. So he's saying, right, if there are certain things that you can do to get ready, by all means do them. But at the end of the day, you eventually have to move. Right? You can't control the weather. You can't control the wind. But if you wait for the perfect conditions to do what you want to do, then you'll never do anything at all. Right? I think of this like when people talk about having kids, and they talk about being ready for kids. As you know, you are never ready for kids. Now, there are certain things you can do to get ready, right? There's some type of stability you can provide them, both financially, a home, a relationship. There's certain things you can do to get ready for kids. But if you wait to have kids till you're ready, none of us would have kids. Right? If you wait for the best time to put seed in the ground in the spring, you will not have a crop in the fall because you'll never put seed in the ground. And again, this is kind of the story of our church as well. Right? The story of our church is if both of the churches spent too long to come together, the E-Free and the Baptist Church, if they spent too long to come together into this consolidation that now is High Prairie Community Church, it never would have happened. The opportunity would have been missed. And so there's certain things we can do to prepare for change, to prepare to move, but ultimately you got to move. If you wait for the best weather, you'll never plant. Solomon continues in verse 5 through 6. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. So only God knows the results of our work. Right? In verse 5, right, he's saying, like, you literally don't know how God forms children in the womb. You have no idea how God makes things happen. And so he encourages us there in verse 6 to get to work regardless. We're called to work regardless of our ability to discern the results of our work. And so if I were to summarize these 3 verses, I'd say this. Solomon's encouraging us not to sit around and wait for things to happen. So here we have, right, some tension, right? Don't be afraid to take risk, but be wise in how you take the risk. And as you do this, don't sit around and just wait for things to happen, right? Move. So what do we do today? Stop waiting. Stop waiting. Maybe you come to church today and you have been waiting around for things to change in your life. And what Solomon says is stop. Nothing is going to change until you do. So maybe you come to church every Sunday hoping to grow in your faith, and I hope you get something out of Sunday morning, but the reality is if this is the only time you open up your Bible and look at Scripture, you will never grow in your faith. So if you want to grow in your faith, stop waiting around. Nothing will happen unless you extend the time and effort to do that. Maybe you want to grow more connected to others in this church and in this community. You will never grow more connected just showing up for 1 hour on Sunday morning. You have to do more than that. It will not happen unless you extend the effort, right? Stop waiting around for things to change. Right? If you are thinking about retirement in the next few years, right? If you want to actually be able to retire with some dignity, you actually have to do something about that today. You have to start investing. And this applies to so many things in life, right? To stop waiting. If you want something to be different, you actually have to move. Right in line with Ecclesiastes, right? This is how life works under the sun. You actually have to do something. When Paige and I were dating, she lived about 9 hours away from where I lived. And so that meant I did a lot of 9-hour drives one way. And part of driving to visit her was the last little stretch she had to drive through Atlanta. Have any of y'all ever driven through Atlanta before? It is fun. It's actually not. It's like most major cities, but there's something special about Atlanta. When you drive through it, the speed limit might say 65 miles an hour, but if you go the speed limit, you're getting passed very fast. And so if you're going 70, 75, you're at least kind of keeping up with traffic, right? You get into Atlanta or any major city for that matter, you have to be very decisive in how you drive, right? If you want to get over, don't expect that just because you put your blinker on, people are going to part ways for you. Right? It's a blinker of telling them, I'm about to get over, move. Right? You have to be very decisive as you drive through a big city. And that was always the hardest for me, right? It was a 9-hour drive, and it was always the last hour driving through Atlanta. Like, I was like in peak condition of driving. But here's the thing, if you were not moving, you were going to get hit. But in the midst of all that movement, you needed to know where you were going, right? What's the point of driving through a major city like that if you're just doing it for the fun of it? No one goes into that for fun. And here's the thing, we can get so distracted making a life about things, though, that don't matter. Right? We have a lot of action, a lot of busyness, yet we aren't going anywhere. And in the busyness of our life, we often neglect to live our lives. And so what Solomon would say here in the next few verses is that we need to be a little bit more decisive. We need to actually move. Right? Stop waiting, but actually do something else. Pivot. Check out verse 7 and 8. He says, light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. So there's Solomon with a kind of a conflicting message, seemingly. Hey, life is sweet. Life is meant to be enjoyed, but remember, death is coming. Death is coming. Be ready for that. Know that this is the course of life events. And so since you know death is coming, it should impact the way you live your life today, right? Death is the one thing that we can count on. It is the one thing that is certain. Verse 9. So he says this, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart, in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. I want to pause there and note the sentence I highlighted there in verse 9. As we sit in these moments of indecision, we freeze up, we don't know what to do next. Here is a bit of advice for us. See, God will often hardwire certain desires into us, right? If you don't know what steps to take next in your life, God puts certain things on your heart and your mind. He hardwires certain desires into us. That's why he says, walk in the ways of your heart, in the sight of your eyes. So in the midst of uncertainty, what this means is often God will lead you in a direction in the way in which he's wired you. For example, if you hate working with kids, God's likely not going to call you to be a teacher, right? If you are a naturally compassionate person, he might lead you into the medical field, right? So God is naturally going to use the things that we love, the things that we desire to do, the things we are passionate about, the things that we're gifted in. He's naturally usually going to use those to lead us into the next steps of our life. And so again, if you're sitting here in a moment and you're frozen up, don't know what to do next, just consider what you enjoy, what you're passionate about. God uses that to direct our steps. So he says this in verse 10, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. So in the midst of being stuck, feeling frozen, not knowing what to do next, he tells us to consider how God has wired us and quit stressing about life, right? Remove vexation from your heart. Life is way too short to be stressed all the time. So he tells us here in these few verses, simply enjoy life and fear God. Enjoy life and fear God. And if we are fearful about what comes next, something that we can do today is stop waiting and start living. As Solomon has already noted multiple times, and he will note again in our time together this morning, life is short. And there's a lot of things in life we have no control over. But there are many things we do have control over. And so I want to just ask you kind of a vivid and maybe a kind of a point-blank question. Are you happy with where you're at in life right now? Why or why not? Why are you not excited about tomorrow? Because this text encourages us to move, to start living. What has God put on your heart? How has he wired you? What are you passionate about? What gifts and experiences has he given you? See, God wants you to enjoy life, knowing that the end comes quick enough. And if you don't know what to do next, Solomon would encourage you to do what you enjoy or do what you are good at. Right? Take those next steps of faith. I always like to think about it this way, especially when I see young guys going into ministry and they're not really sure what they want to do. I usually tell them, do a little of everything. Right? Maybe spend some time working with kids and you'll quickly realize you either enjoy that or you don't. Right? Be a youth pastor and you'll quickly either say, I love it or I hate it. Right? Spend some time maybe interning at a church and you'll quickly realize maybe kind of traditional ministry is not for me. Maybe parachurch ministry. Right? So do something. Don't just sit there. Begin to kind of figure out how God has wired you. Right? Start living. As I began to finish up my time in college, I began to feel this burden from ministry. I may have shared this with you guys before. And as I began to weigh some potential options, I began to get a little afraid. I began to get scared, right? I was scared to move. At the time, I was in college, and it was a big enough jump to move 3 hours away from home. But I was still in the state of Florida, right? It still felt like home somewhat. And so when I consider where God might lead me, I'm looking at a whole different time zone, states away. And I began to kind of freeze up and get scared. I was afraid of kind of delaying my entrance into ministry. I had a lot of folks I was graduating with from college, and they were entering right into the workforce, right? They were getting those positions as youth pastors and associate pastors, and here I was just thinking about doing more school. I was afraid it would put me behind. Honestly, I was afraid I wouldn't finish. I was afraid of making that step of faith, going somewhere for school, and failing to finish because I either run out of money or I run out of energy to do this endeavor. I was scared. And yet I was encouraged by many other folks around me, particularly those who had been in ministry for some time. I was encouraged to go ahead and do it because they said now is the best time. Life does not get any simpler. They said now is the best time. It's not going to get easier to do this moving forward. So I was faced with a dilemma, right? What do I do next? Do I step into the unknown or continue to do what was known to me? Again, maybe that's where you are at today, right? You don't know what comes next. You're uncertain about the future. And so you're wondering, right? Do I step into the unknown or I just do what is familiar to me? Here's what Solomon would say on that issue. Verse 1 of chapter 12. Two statements that in many ways contrast each other. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days to come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. So he says here, early on in life, develop this relationship with your Creator. Because before you realize it, life will come to an end, right? Kind of near the end, he says, you'll have no pleasure in your days. Solomon would say, start following God early in life because soon your life will be over. And now in the next several verses, in verses 2 through 7, there is this progression of life that Solomon paints for us, right? One that we've all either witnessed, have experienced, or are experiencing. This progression of life from being young to eventually seeing death. I'm going to read through these pretty quickly, and I just want you to note the progression that he builds here, right? Follow him faithfully, right, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men are bent and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors of the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of the song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to the God who gave it. So he has this encouragement in verse 1, start following God early in life. And if you did not do that, right, the saying is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is to do it today. Solomon would say start following God as soon as you possibly can, because through this beautiful picture he creates in verse 2 through 7, death is coming. Do it more sooner than later, because as he says in verse 7, we are dust, and eventually we will return back to the dust, and our spirit will go back to the God who made it. And he concludes this encouraging section with this statement. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. We all know that death is how life ends. Unless Jesus returns before then, we are all eventually going to die. And Solomon, as he's kind of seemingly bounced back and forth on the emotional spectrum, he encourages us to enjoy life under the sun, right? We get one time around. Enjoy this life, but don't forget that it eventually comes to an end. And this provides important context for us. Verse 9, he begins to summarize really his effort in writing this book. He says this, besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. Solomon summarizing what he's attempting to accomplish through this book. He's giving us wise words to live by, words that have been inspired by God. And he encourages folks here not to deviate from the wisdom that is found in this text. Verse 11 to 12. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. Right? So wise words are meant to encourage us, to motivate us forward, even sometimes painfully motivate us forward. And he says they're given by one shepherd. It could be certainly an allusion to Solomon writing these, but honestly, I believe it's more of an allusion to the one who inspired him to write this, right? These are wise words given to us by Solomon as he was inspired by God to write this. So he says this, "My son, beware of anything else beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh." Right? It's a picture of what wisdom is intended to do for us, to motivate us, to move us forward. And he warns us about following anything that contradicts God's wisdom. Bottom end of verse 12, there's many self-help books, many good TED Talks on wise ways to live our life. And the reality is, often they're not incorrect. But when they conflict with what has been written in Scripture, that's when we take our direction. We step in the direction of Scripture. So again, kind of final concluding words. Finally, he finishes up this way. The end of the matter. All has been heard. And here's where I really want us to focus, right? This is kind of the focus of our text for today. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Final words for us. Right, as you are in maybe a moment of indecision, feeling frozen, uncertain about the future, what he encourages us to do is fear God and keep his commandments. Pursue him wholeheartedly, because as you do that, often the next step will be made clear. We all know that death is how life ends. And Solomon would encourage us, therefore, to start following God ASAP. So when we fear what comes next, what we are called to do is to stop waiting, start living, and continue following. Maybe for some of you, you've never actually started following Christ. You've been to church quite a few times. Maybe you grew up in church. Maybe your dad's a pastor, but you've never made that personal commitment to follow Christ. And if you are uncertain about your future on this earth, I guarantee you're probably uncertain about your future and eternity. And one thing that you can do today to create a level of certainty about your life is committing your life to following Jesus. Right? That's really where the start line of the Christian life begins. It's the commitment we make to Christ. And so if you've never begun following Christ, you feel uncertain about your future, this is one of the best ways to find some certainty in it. Right? It's dealing with our sin, committing our life to wholeheartedly following him. But maybe you've done that before. And so I want to encourage you to lean into that relationship, to take that next step of faith, right? Don't forsake that relationship with him. If you are uncertain about the future, it might not be clear. We might not know what comes next, but the reality is we know who will be there in the future, and it will be our Creator. So build that love relationship with our Creator, and he will walk with us through whatever comes next. Going back to the shuttle disaster, the world watched in shock as the Challenger was lost. But the lesson of that day was incredibly clear. Hesitation when lives are at stake can be deadly. Freezing up in the midst of uncertainty can be just as devastating. Right, the Challenger program, after that happened, right, they went back and they evaluated all the breakdowns in communication and ultimately what went wrong, and they made adjustments since then. The hesitation is ultimately what cost us a shuttle and many lives. And for us as well, for freezing up in the moment, not knowing what to do next, that uncertainty can be just as destructive, just as devastating. That's why in this text, as Solomon concludes Ecclesiastes, he encourages us to stop waiting, start living, and continue following. Right? Follow Jesus and do the next right thing. Right? Own the unknown. 2 questions for this week as we dwell on this text. What is something in your life that you have been waiting for that you should be acting on? And what would it look like to follow God and act wisely moving into the unknown? Let's bow our heads in order of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this text and just this wisdom, Lord, about how to live our lives. I know there are probably many folks here that feel like they're at a crossroads, feel like they're stuck. They don't know where to go from where they're at right now. And Lord, I pray that as we dwell on this text this week, amidst all the uncertainty about our future here on earth, Lord, may we have clarity about our eternity and have clarity on our relationship with you. Lord, may we be bold. Lord, may we move in a direction, Lord, that is ultimately towards you and how you've wired us and created us. Give us courage to step into the unknown, and give us courage to admit when we need help, because we need your help every step of our lives. And God, right now, I know there are multiple people here who certainly need that courage and that encouragement. Lord, may we not be afraid to admit when we need help. May we not be too prideful to say that there's room for growth in our Christian life. Lord, may we be humble enough to say, yeah, we've made some mistakes. We need to pivot and change what we're doing here. Ultimately, Lord, may we look more like you. Thank you for this message. Thank you for the book of Ecclesiastes. And Lord, I pray that we can apply the wisdom that has been spoken about here to our lives. We love you in your name. Amen.